And here we are. Hi guys, hi my friends, hi Grega.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao Grega.
Ciao, Grega.
Ciao, ciao Stefano.
Hi.
Thank you very much to be here with us with our Geek Talk. Grega, it's a real pleasure to have you here and spend some time with you talking about nerd stuff as a friends in front of a beer. We spend a lot of time in front of a beer together with other friends talking about nerd stuff. But first of all, Grega, again, thank you. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself, just a brief introduction.
Of course.
Please.
Thanks for inviting me as well. It's great to see you again after a while, hopefully in person soon. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I've been in IT pretty much my whole life. I'm one of those lucky punks that knew at the age of 10 what they were going to do in their lives. So that gives me at least a 10-year advantage over most people in IT. Professionally, I'd actually taken up programming initially. So not many people who know me professionally are aware of that. I've been a developer for about 3 to 4 horrible years in my late teens. Then because software development just wasn't my thing, I started looking around for alternatives that will allow me to still, work with information technology and mostly operating systems. And I was kind of leaning into that administration direction. And a colleague of mine pointed out that there's this thing, Unix, that he was administering at the company I used to work at. To which I replied, "This is wonderful. Let me see what this is all about." And then, of course, you want to keep practicing and trying on, and because I couldn't run HPUX on my PC, I reached out to get some Linux onto my box, and then I think it's a line in Casablanca. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Now that just kind of kept me busy for the next 17, 18 years. So I was basically a sysadmin for the rest of my professional career. I'm talking as if I've retired already. And then
There's a long way.
Yeah, somewhere along the way, I started teaching as well, and that basically became my biggest love. Just for almost 2 decades, I've been accumulating knowledge and experience, and this is all pretty much worthless. I can take it into my grave with me, but by teaching, you at least get to give some of that back to other people, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So that's it in a nutshell, really.
This is really important. Giving back with teaching our knowledge. It's a real privilege, and I always say that to be an instructor is the most beautiful work in the world because of this, because of sharing knowledge. Grega, the idea of about our Geek Talk is talking about how open source changed our life, but not only our life, but also everyone's life, because everyone now one today use open source software in a day-by-day life. Let me say, when we use IoTs, when we use internet connection, when we use mobile phones, and through the mobile phones we see our home, our house with our IP cam, and there is an open source software. And when I turn on my AC in a house from the mobile through an open source software. It's really important to share how open source software changed not only our life as a geek, as a nerd, but also everyone's life. And for this reason, I want to ask you, how much open source changed your life?
Well, it not just changed my life, it made it. Because I've actually been involved with open source since 2000, something like that, professionally, of course. I've been experimenting with it for some years before that, but professionally, I started working with open source software 20 years ago. Ever since then, I've actually been involved in some way or another, either deploying it or sometimes even just patching a bug here and there, submitting a bug report or a fix to something that needed to be done. So from that perspective, it obviously influenced me a lot, being that we spend a third of our lives sleeping and a third of our lives working. Now, for that other third, which isn't necessarily related to professional life, I'll say open source did affect it, but perhaps in a slightly less expected way, I would say. Things like when I started working as an admin 20 years ago, it was all rather new. Like the concept of thinking that open source community, I would say, is pervaded by the almost, you'd say, kind of radical idea that everything should be shared and made available to others, not just as in free beer, but also as in something you can learn from and modify and make better, and you have the ability to do this. That was a rather exciting and new concept to me back then. But then, as you get used to it, it kind of gets under your skin, and you start thinking like that, and you adopt that attitude yourself as well. And you just can't really imagine the world without it, without that kind of functionality, I'd say. And I think this is, among other things, I mean, ultimately, we do need to pay the bills and eat and, get dressed and so on. So there's got to be some reward for your work involved in this, but ultimately, the passion that we all have for IT, I think it's only true passion if you really feel you can give something back, you can get involved, and you can contribute to. I mean, at least you have the ability. Not necessarily it's not necessarily you actually make use of that, but just being aware that you can, if you have to, that there's nobody stopping you from changing things, making them better. That kind of changes your I would almost say character to a degree, and you just start being a different person ultimately. So that's what I meant by saying how open source changed my life in that third part of our lives, which isn't professional. It did. I don't know. Maybe it sounds corny, but it did make me a different person in that sense. It's a lot more natural for me to just share things with others, and just whatever that is, that experience, time, whatever.
I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you when you say that changed our way to be as a person and as a human being, not only as a professional. Let me say that open source is great. Also, it's important to do business as well. We have to pay bill,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah.
We have to pay the house, the mortgage, whatever. But for this reason, it's important to make a professional life and have a business, have money from this.
Yeah.
But it's based on values. It's based on the idea that sharing increase the value of everyone doing also business, but it's a great way. And as you know, in the first times, open source was not supported from everyone else, like companies. You remember Microsoft or companies like that. But now everyone's is understanding that giving the contribution on open source make them more popular, first of all, but also increase the value of their products.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, let me say that now we are all of us using a same word, cloud, DevOps, but there is no cloud. There would be no cloud without open source.
Sure.
Everything is based on open source software. Every cloud service is based on open source. And again, the cloud that we know today, that we use today, is totally a child of the open source values and way to contribute.
Absolutely. It's there was this moment, I think, in early 2000s, late 90s. It became more apparent in the early 2000s that a lot of the commercial vendors started being aware of open source and the possibility to, for them at that point, it was just a possibility to save money in development and just take something that somebody else has done, lock it in a box, put their sticker on it, like here's my label, and then sell it as their own product. I distinctly remember we were using. I was working for a search engine company at that time. It was a wonderful job, but very technically demanding. We had problems in production that nobody else in the world had at the time. Google was still a relatively unknown search engine back then. So the world more or less consisted of local country specific indexes. So nobody was doing it on a scale that Google is doing it now. And we had the only, I think about the only commercial bit of software that we were using in that company was a firewall. It was appliance. It was an Israeli firewall manufacturer. I think we all know who that is. They produced firewall software for Windows, but their appliance actually was running a modified version of FreeBSD. And the funniest thing about it was, like, when you've kind of gone and looked under the surface, you saw it was just like really just a FreeBSD appliance that had the network device driver patched with a chunk of code that they developed that would count the number of MAC addresses that the device saw on the internal network. And the licensing for that software was based about the number of internal machines that you kind of protect with it. And it was quite ridiculous seeing that, because like, what you guys think that, you know, just patch the network driver and you know, that's it. That's a kind of a safe and profitable way of licensing your appliance. I mean, anybody can just recompile a driver and put back the original one, and that's it. So there was like a period of concern, I would say, that we all had back then, that this would become more prevalent behavior, that the big players were in just to take advantage of open source and just kind of rip off whatever was useful for them and just throw away the rest. And there was a lot of concern, I think, back then about where's the money going to come from to sustain these kinds of projects. Because as just again, we have to pay the bills somehow. Sure. But luckily, not everyone was like that. Right? I mean, I certainly one of the fondest feelings that I have is for an amazing project that's been around since the 90s, mid-90s. We all know it. It's the PostgreSQL Foundation. I've become acquainted with that database server like shortly after it's been renamed from Postgres 95 to PostgreSQL. And I've been using it ever since. And I think a wonderful thing about the foundation itself is that, let's say, Fujitsu had a major use case for Postgres, and they became interested in it. But because it didn't have certain features, they were facing, I guess, like a choice between either we do it like everybody else is doing, just take it and add the stuff that we need and then maintain our own fork spin-off, or we can invest into the foundation and become a partial owner and gain some degree of stewardship over where this thing is going. And I think that's kind of became the model for financing open source development.
Yeah.
Just like a very successful one. And that's, for example, one way that led to the other major players finally realizing that this thing is not going away. People are investing money, so what about if we invested ourselves? And yeah, again, there's the Apache Foundation, which is ubiquitous with their amount of software and their. I remember the World Web Server Watch. I think Apache was like the most popular web server in the world for like 10 years in a row or something. If it isn't, I haven't checked it in a while, so I don't know what the numbers are right now. It's probably still there in a major representation. So again, that kind of triggered the ball, and
exactly.
When it got rolling, it just couldn't stop it. So yeah, now everything is not these.
Exactly.
You're
right.
These aren't. But pretty much every other phone in the world is running open source software.
You're right.
Greg, I have a question for you. You said earlier that you used this phrase. You said bills have to be paid somehow, and this is a phrase that we often listen from people that are involved with open source, but somehow they are trying to justify their behavior. So especially in the IT field and more in the cloud, everyone are using open source as the foundation of their business model. But only few companies are really tethered with the open source mindset, working with upstream communities and releasing the open source code of their product, of their commercial product. So one of my biggest concern was how can companies make revenue with open source in a sustainable and an efficient way?
It's a great question, and I just happen to have, I think, about 7-8 years worth of experience in that area, because I was involved. What was that? Just after 2010, my friends and I started up a company that consisted of 6 people. I mean, 4 founding members, but then a couple of other friends joined, and that was the technical team. Then we quickly added a couple of sales people as well. And we had a long and thorough discussion before we formally founded the company about what the business model is going to be, what's going to be the financial kind of mechanisms that are going to sustain this company and keep it alive. And it's a services-only based company, right? So there's no manufacturing. We do not actually produce physical things and sell them. We sell our work. It's quite similar to developing software. It's just that we were doing mostly consulting and then added training to our portfolio as well. And see, the nice thing about services-only based companies is that it's impossible to create loss if you think it over well. I mean, of course, the legal requirements for companies are that they have to employ workers and give them salaries. So that's a little bit of a trick here, because even if you're not earning money, you have to keep paying the people that work for you. But on the other hand, let's call it lucky circumstance in our case was that this company consisted of 4 friends. So we weren't actually considering ourselves as employees, right? We were just considering ourselves as people who want to do good stuff and who know things and are probably among the best people in the region, at least, to do these kinds of things. So again, this is the kind of mentality that you can't really have unless you've lived with open source for a long time, right? In a normal approach, things would be goal-driven. Like people would be like, "Oh, we have to make €1 million this year to be able to pay out all the expenses that we have." And so on. We didn't think that way. We just said, "Okay, look, whatever money we earn, we're going to split it. Now let's see how much is the operational cost for the company, the accounting, the rents, the electricity, the servers that we have to run for our own purposes and also for testing purposes, for demonstration projects and whatnot." And we assess that we don't really need much for that. I mean, we can always rent a smaller office if we need to. If the going is tough, we do not absolutely have to own anything. I mean, even if that adds value to the company, owning real estate, for example, or whatever, as having assets, it also creates more cost because you have to maintain that, and it's just getting more and more complicated the moment you add weight to the company. So then we finally figured out that about 20 to 30% of the profits that we make should probably be put aside. Just if they're not immediately spent, they'll be there when we need them, if we need them at some point. And then we figured out that there's about 70% of profits that we could just distribute among whoever made that money. So there's always demand for services. If you're a good salesperson, you could probably keep a single person, can keep a large amount of consultants busy for a very long amount of time. So we kind of built a model around this fact, and it turns out that one of the favorite quotes of my very first manager, general manager in my life, was "Good work creates more work." And the only trick here is to be smart enough to get paid for it. Really. Now, tying back into your question, I mean, we didn't have that much of a problem getting projects into the house and then obviously earning the money using both consulting and then soon afterwards also training. We're looking at it like this, basically. You have a car and it's falling apart, and you need someone not just to fix it, but to make it a better car. So we can do that. We know how to do this. But I mean, imagine then that if you bring your car in for maintenance to a mechanic, that they, or as you purchase your car, for example, they do not just sell you that. They just sell you that and then also say, hey, by the way, if you want to know how to change the oil, we can teach you that as well. And you'll be saving by doing this, because if you have the time to change the oil yourself, you won't have to pay for the mechanic whenever the time comes. And tying back into your question, that was consulting work, of course. It's not programming work. We were just using software that somebody already wrote, and we were doing cool things with that software, like Lego blocks. But also people that do write software, open source software, and need to live from that. The best thing is that, if you make software that is useful for someone, and that's kind of the idea, you can just write software that just for the hell of it. If you write software that is useful to someone, that someone is always going to see more use for it. And by being successful in using it, other people are going to want to do the same thing. And that creates demand. And demand is necessary to earn money. And that's where the trick lies. The moment you have demand to do things with your software that you didn't necessarily want to, you have the ability or the opportunity to earn money. Because if someone wants your software to do things it's not doing yet, well, you can give me a little bit of money and I'm going to dedicate my time to make it do this. But I think that became...
Yes, but...
Go ahead.
Can the business model can stay alive in a way that a small company or a small or medium company is not a big firm like Red Hat or someone else that produce open source software and then is strong enough to propose that software as a product, because the software is a project, an open source project will be shared by, for example, a small company like us. But in the moment and in order to the company to make profitable that open source software, or better, is it possible for a small company, for a small and medium company, to create a business model that works on top of open source software that is not an evolution on already shared software, but a new project? This is the tricky point that we are facing, and we are trying to understand how to solve, because it's always easy to a big name to push a new project and then transform a project in a product. But for a small company that has not as a strong brand, it's difficult to push on that
risk.
side. Yeah, it's a big risk, and it's a big risk, but it's can be let me say, dangerous. We wanna to make a project like this, want to make the work better, but make also a business on top on it. But can be dangerous for the little firm, a little company that produce that software.
This is a question that proprietary software perfectly answer and still answer this question since decades. But how can open source can answer this question?
I think the margin, the profit margin, comes from really making something like some of the best business minds in the world. They've got this inspiring and brilliant thinking, quotes that you just read and you say, "Ah, come on, how didn't I think of it?" But I think one of the best ones was just create stuff that people want to use. Right, and that's it. That's number one. Yeah.
Number one point. Solve a problem. First of all, you have to solve the problem or solve a desire. This is the first point. And first of all, is for yourself. When you solve a problem for yourself, and then you want to share that the solution based on the software.
It happens quite often that good open source software is. I can think of an example like Jenkins, let's say. It's a brilliant example. It was just a build tool that Kosuge wrote for himself, and then it became popular inside Sun Microsystems, and then it became more popular, and it kind of spilled over the boundaries of.
Who? Grega.
And lead to successful
Grega.
But also, even if you just have a look around and say, hey, what's like, I don't know, my idea, for example, was we would do consulting projects and we would see if there's a red line, if there's a pattern. If 2, 3, 4 of our company, of our customers have similar problems, then that's kind of almost enough for us to sit down and rethink our solution and create something more generic. That's kind of enough traction that would allow you to productize your service and not make every project an incident with a very high amount of work that has to be invested into the solution, but rather just kind of sit down, think things over, make something more general, more I'd say more adjustable that could fit more people's needs, and then package that in a box. And that's where you can start selling. And that approach is rather generic, whether you're making it a proprietary solution or an open source one. The key here is just that I think open source companies, especially if they're small, cannot diversify so much, but it does require you to do that. You have to write some glue, even if it's just some scripts that hold things together. So if there's some development involved, you have to deploy it at a customer site. So there's some consulting involved as well. It's not just taking a box and putting it on a shelf. You have to do all these kinds of different things, and each of them will kind of put a little bit of money into the box. And then at the end, if your project is or if your solution is interesting enough and if it's solving enough problems, you kind of see that you're making money and you're afloat.
Right.
Okay, Grega, we lost you for a few seconds, and now you are froze.
Really?
your image is static. But
let me stop and start the camera.
Yeah, perfect. Now it's fine.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Good point. I want to change topic quickly. Oh, freeze again.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We hear you, but it's only about the video.
Okay. Now it's moving. Now you're moving. Okay. Grega, I want to change topic. And I want to touch a topic where you are really strong, and you are into the DevOps methodologies from a while. And DevOps delivers a lot of powerful innovations. But requires new skills and a whole mindset. How can people and companies fill the gap in the road of DevOps culture and application?
That's that's a complex question that many people have built their careers around.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, most certainly taking responsibility is the first step. From my experience, at least, there's got to be a desire to own whatever it is that you're running. And it has to be a shared desire between everybody in the team. So I think that's step number one, because when people accept they share the responsibility for whatever project they're keeping alive, that just completely changes everything. Because instead of pointing fingers at others, they would more or less feel challenged whenever something's gone wrong. You're not looking for the whoever is responsible for it, because you're responsible for it, at least in part. So if something is happening and you're the only one who sees it, raise it to everybody else's attention and start talking about the possible solution for that, regardless of whether you're a tester or a business analyst or a sysadmin or whoever. I mean, certainly there are things that you have to do in your organization before you can start applying this, which is the infamous cross-functional team, which allows you to have more insight behind the table when you're sitting behind the table. Excuse me. You definitely have more insight if you look at problems from 7 different perspectives, as opposed to having 7 developers who only see some code that needs to be written. So that immediately, again, creates some positive solutions, or at least ideas, some creative energy that can be used to kind of push forward and make everything a little bit more smooth and less painful, let's say. So it's more or less again a cultural and mental thing. It's not so much a technical. I'm having big issues whenever I'm teaching things like CI/CD. A lot of people just think of CI/CD and continuous release as well as some tools that they will deploy, and then things will just start happening. And it's not like that. Even continuous integration is a problem of organizing work more than it is a technical problem. We can all deploy Git, but if you're not splicing your project into small enough tasks, then you won't be able to integrate your source code 7 to 10 times a day. So it's a problem of organization. It's not technically you can do it once a month, but the results are going to be horrible if you just merge your code once every couple of weeks. You should really be doing it 7 to 10 times a day, or something common enough to. And there's a feedback here. If you do it, and again, I just want to point out, this is not a technical problem, and it's not a technical outcome. If you do code merges 7 to 10 times a day, then everybody, whenever they do a code pull, will be more and better acquainted with the state of the project as it is right now. Again, whether they're a tester, whether they're a business analyst, whether they're a developer, whoever is coming into contact with that stuff is going to have a better insight into where it's going. And we'll be able to step up and say, hey, I think there's a little problem with where we're going right now because we're missing this and this. And that is the critical feedback that you can, that's kind of the innovation that we're talking about. It's not technical, it's organizational.
Totally. Very, very interesting. I totally agree with you.
No, please.
I just wanted to think in terms of DevOps and just thinking out loud here. It's really amazing that when you start looking at the problems as a shared responsibility kind of thing, then pretty much everything becomes smoother and easier, and because you're riding the horse, it's not stomping on you anymore. I think that was kind of a analogy that I was going for. But you had a question, Stefan, or a comment?
Yes, was we can change a little bit the argument, but I can't help but asking your opinion in what is happening in the CentOS community in these days. So just to make a brief recap a little bit. So Red Hat is basically decommissioning what we know as CentOS 8 as a downstream of Red Hat Enterprise Linux in favor of what has been called last year CentOS Stream. And this led to panic for someone that was already working and putting effort on projects based on CentOS 8, and for someone, and for others were complaining about basically. So Red Hat is talking about communication problem. So this has been communicated poorly. This was the last statement we heard from Red Hat. But in the other hand, communities are complaining about a vow about the initial end of life of the project being adjusted in the middle of the life of the project. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think from Red Hat's side, it's a resource allocation issue, right? You have a finite amount of people that can work on a project, so you can't do two things at the same time. I think it's essentially as easy as that. From what I've been seeing in community reactions to something they call a shutdown, right? It's not a shutdown, it's a change, it's a metamorphosis. So whatever CentOS was hardly, let's put it like this. The old way the CentOS distribution was being maintained and published certainly didn't cut it. I remember myself, I used to use it a lot, but I remember myself waiting for like half a year for CentOS 7 to be released. Like the RHEL 7 was out for half a year already, and I didn't have anything to update to. So at that point, I mean, you ask yourself a question: is the tool I'm using the right tool for the job anyway? I mean, because that was actually the same problem even before Red Hat bought the project, or the company around the project, right? And started maintaining CentOS themselves. It took months for updates to be published. It's not just a recompile of Rails source code, as they themselves have always been saying. It is due to legal reasons, due to branding, due to whatever. It is not the same as Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It has never been, and perhaps now that it's finally in a place where it can influence Rails, it will become closer to it. It will become more like it. It never was that close. Now, after having some production issues due to updates, I personally figured out that this isn't a production-grade operating system. Call it enterprise or not, it isn't. It doesn't have the amount of QA that a production-grade operating system should have. It doesn't have the agility that I need. I need patches sometimes in less than 24 hours. That's what my SLAs require me to do. So I cannot afford to violate my SLAs because that's going to cost me more money than if I just simply decide to actually do the right thing, pay for a service. If I want responsiveness from somebody, I'm willing to pay for it. And I mean, looking at CentOS as something you would run in production is a mistake to begin with. We've had active inquiries from large electronics companies, for example, to do something like CentOS with JBoss application server. And we were just saying, are you insane? I mean, it's like the amount of work it takes to rebrand and recompile, be it an operating system or an application server from scratch, and then maintain it, is such a tremendous amount of work that it's cheaper for you to buy a subscription. Really, just go ahead and just go online, buy it, and forget about this problem, because you don't have it anymore. You get updates, you get support for that at a lower price, much lower price than we would be able to give you. So I think in one sense, CentOS was never what people thought it is. But even for those that have used it as it was intended, perhaps, I'm guessing right now, but that would more or less be ISVs, people who basically who need a Linux distribution, who need something that they can legally, legitimately distribute packages, their own product, and distribute without expensive partnerships and maybe restrictions that partnerships impose on them. I mean, even for them, it's like, wait, stop thinking about releases in the old-fashioned way. We don't do that anymore. Today, it's a build of a container image that you're deploying. It's a snapshot anyway. At any point in time, whatever you're running in production is a conglomerate of different services and packages as it is at that point in time. So if it's necessary for you to be able to identify that conglomerate and replicate it somewhere else, I guess the easiest way is to build a container image or an OS3 image if you have to deploy it in the traditional way. And that isn't really something that's tied to a release. It's tied to a certain set of software components that you need. So it's a change that has been coming for a long time. I don't think it's any more painful than changing to system D after. I think it's actually much less painful because it doesn't bring you new tools. It doesn't bring you a completely new language that you have to start interfacing with. It doesn't replace any functionality that you were depending on. It's just a different release model. Stream as a continuously evolving set of software updates. It's JBoss application server, Wildfly, as the upstream project is called, has had that for a while now, and nobody is crying about it. People still write great Java software and publish it, and it's still solving business problems. It's just that change is something that is as ubiquitous as a morning sunrise, and yet people still oppose it and try to kind of plan the project as if it's never going to happen. Change always happens.
Yeah.
It's just,
I like your point, Grega. I perfectly understand. Things always change, and maybe we always have misunderstood what the CentOS was really since the beginning, and now people are facing this change because they have built a business on top of it, but now they have to rethink what they are going to do.
I would ask myself, if I was struck particularly hard by this change, I would ask myself, am I doing things the right way here? Or am I just being like, Microsoft and what we mentioned initially, like Microsoft and IBM? IBM has a strange policy here, but let's say some commercial companies have been doing in the early open source years, right? Am I doing things that way? Am I just looking for something free of charge to use? Or am I really actually willing to internalize this open source way of thinking and contribute back? I mean, this is going to create a lot of useful solutions, actually, if people are willing to. And at least now they can, because CentOS has assumed the position in which it's actually possible and meaningful to contribute. Yeah, I think that's better.
Clear.
That works.
Guys, Grega, I totally agree with your point on this, and I think that it will be a point, a little change of direction on how to build a business critical application on top of software that should be supported, that have a specific SLA or whatever. Guys, time flies. We are already at 52 minutes. It's, I think it's enough. We have to close here because it will be too long, and it was really interesting, and always it's a time fly when having fun, and
coffee flies as well.
Exactly. And Grega, thank you very much. I would like to make maybe another one in the future, and I will ping you for another appointment and talk with another coffee and talk about some other stuff that obviously related on open.
When I was thinking about today's chat, I mean, there are so many cool things that came to my mind, like not just open source software, but also that's something that a lot of people forget about. There's also open source hardware, and it has changed.
Yeah, totally.
Radically, and things like other open source things, like Johnny's Cooking for Nerds, right? And stuff that just is there and can be contributed to, as well as getting some value out of it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to perhaps addressing some of these some other time as well.
Absolutely. Training, looking forward to have a beer together, not virtually, but in real life. And again, thank you very much, and see you soon.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Grega.
Thank you.
You too.
Ciao.
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 Bye.